everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Oner podcast, the podcast where we break down and review films all in one big, long, unbroken take. I'm Austin Archer. With me, as always, is my childhood next-door neighbor and lifelong best friend,
Cramer, England.
Okay, Cramer.
Yes.
So we decided to do something a little different this week. We decided to go back into the vault. We didn't do anything that's in theaters. We recently reviewed Captain America: Brave New World, the new Captain America movie with Harrison Ford as the Red Hulk, and there's obviously Thunderbolts coming out soon. And we decided to kind of go back and take a look at a few MCU movies from a past era, from, I guess, phases 1 through 3 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which phases it was. The arc, kind of the Infinity.
Yeah,
Stone,
Infinity Saga.
The saga that begins with Iron Man in 2005 or whatever, and ends with Endgame in 2019.
Yeah.
We just grabbed two kind of random movies. One was a Captain America movie so that we could be kind of directly comparing a Captain America film to what we just watched with Brave New World. And the other was just another kind of like random one from that era. We decided to watch Captain America: The Winter Soldier and Ant-Man and Captain America Ant-Man.
Captain Ant-Man.
And they're all called Captain America from that era.
Yes.
Captain America, Thor, The Dark World, Captain America, Iron Man 3.
Yes. They were trying to get an audience.
Captain America, Avengers: The Age of Ultron. That was the problem with that era, was that everything was called Captain America. But we watched Captain America: The Winter Soldier and Ant-Man. And I think that the idea here is just to sort of have a conversation about like what, and I know that I feel like this, a lot of people have talked about this on the internet in media commentary of like, did the MCU fall off? Is the MCU still as good or as relevant culturally as it once was? Are the stories hitting as hard as they used to? In my personal opinion, I don't think that it has been hitting as hard for some time now.
I think I would say that even Disney has noticed it, and Marvel has noticed that it hasn't. And I think when they started focusing on movies and TV shows, it really kind of like, I mean, when you really start expanding, it takes a toll a lot on creatives, right? And I think that was probably just too much. So you've seen them scale back. They're not making as many TV shows, and they're trying not to churn out so much, which I think is going to be beneficial in the long run. But we're still kind of feeling the effects of that, I think.
Yeah, you definitely, I mean, there was like after Endgame and like once Disney Plus launched, there was all of a sudden so much Marvel content. There already had been so much Marvel content, in like a 15-year span. But then there was just all of a sudden, between WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Hawkeye, and there was all of a sudden just this massive influx, and it was too much to keep up with. She-Hulk and it does feel like they're paring back. But going and watching Captain America: Brave New World, it was like, it doesn't really feel like the pulling back has given you guys time to really hone in on the storytelling. It still feels like these stories are a little underbaked. Maybe there's too many cooks in the kitchen. I think personally, my kind of overarching theory for all of the MCU and all of these storylines is that they're suffering from something that I'm deciding to call narrative decay. And it's sort of something that I don't know if there's any cure for it. It's something that happens to lots of TV shows when they figuratively jump the shark. Like, it's just sort of, in my opinion, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a very expensive, very big, very long-running TV show. But for a long time, we would all show up 2 or 3 times a year and watch the new episode of the Marvel show. And there were new characters being introduced, and storylines would overlap, and they would sort of, the continuity of the story was like where one story ended, the next one would kind of begin and grab the baton and take it. And it was a very entertaining, very well-crafted TV show for the most part. When you actually watch those movies through, starting at Iron Man and going to kind of Endgame, it's a really impressive piece. Some things get kind of rearranged or retconned occasionally, but for the most part, there's a lot of things that pay off nicely narratively. And I think this happens with just like a lot of TV shows, particularly American TV shows, where a show is a hit and the network doesn't want to let it go because it's a big money maker.
Yes.
But the show kind of gets to a point where it's sort of completed all of the natural arcs that it was setting up for its main characters, and it doesn't really know what to do with them anymore. And so it'll start doing things like killing characters off that people didn't want to see killed off, or it'll start doing things like setting up weird love triangles between, it's like,
it's
like Joey and Rachel, and you're like, nobody asked for Joey and Rachel.
I'm thinking about The Office.
Like,
okay, Michael leaves, you should end the show.
Right.
And it was kind of a natural end. They went on for 2 more seasons. They weren't horrible, but that kind of, in my opinion, you kind of want to leave people wanting more. Like that's a great way to get people always excited about your show. The problem with a lot of American TV shows is that they start a show without the end in mind. And that's why there are so many TV shows that have very unsatisfying endings, like Game of Thrones, which I can't say. I have not watched Game of Thrones, but from the majority of what I've heard, people are not satisfied with the ending. 24, it's just like when you start a season, you have the end in mind. So a season can usually be good. But then when you're trying to wrap up a series, it's like if you didn't have that ending in mind from the very beginning, it's not going to feel like it paid off. Like it happened. And this happens all the time. So like with the MCU, they had the end in mind of Thanos, like from the beginning, pretty much. Like maybe they didn't know with like Iron Man and like Thor, but I think about probably honestly around Thor, for sure the Avengers, because they had that post-credit scene.
Right.
But they knew that Thanos was the end. Thanos was the end game, pun intended. Right? Like that was the one that they were working towards. And it felt so satisfying because every movie all of a sudden started leading up to that point. So now we've had this ending, and now it's like what we've talked about with a TV show. Like, well, where do we go from here? Well, let's try to make these characters interesting. But the other thing that I thought about, especially with Brave New World, like Sam Wilson is not a leading character.
Right.
We have a movie that is about a side character who is a sidekick that's not really as interesting as the main character. And he's still not really that interesting, and he's not really a story driver.
Well, and it's like, inside of, so knowing that your end goal is to get to Thanos and to get to that confrontation with Thanos and the Avengers, that's going to be the ultimate test for this group of heroes that we're tracking across this episodic story.
Right.
No, inside of that, there are all these character arcs that are being built. There's this arc with, so like we watched Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and there's this really nice arc that you're tracking with Steve Rogers, who starts off as this idealistic, patriotic World War II soldier who's like this symbol of American. He's an American propaganda symbol about American exceptionalism and American freedom, and he sacrifices everything for America and his country in the war. And the movie Captain America the First Avenger ends with him going into the ice. The next time we see Captain America in this continuity is he's awakened to help the Avengers fight Loki, and he comes out and he basically just gets right back into action as like he's a soldier who knows how to act as part of a unit, and he kind of butts heads with Tony Stark because Tony Stark's a little bit of a do-it-himself guy, and he's got to get Tony to be like, hey man, if we're going to work together, we got to work together as a team. That's how I work best. And Tony's got to show a little bit of humility to like, hey, I'm not trying to step on your toes here. I'm just saying we got to be a team. And by the time we get to Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Cap's still sort of running ops for S.H.I.E.L.D. and just doing what he knows how to do, which is like take orders and show up and do things. But from the beginning of the movie, we kind of see that he's a little bit disillusioned with like, I just kind of got woken up and now I'm just sort of running errands for
well, it really, especially, I love that they have Black Widow in this because of her story. and because of how gray she is,
Mhm.
like Captain America at the beginning is kind of still black and white, right? Like in the
Yeah.
40s, it was like, oh, black and white, good and evil.
Mhm.
Nazis are bad. The axis of power or whatever it was,
Allied
we're good.
forces,
Thank
allied
you.
yeah,
Allied forces are better,
yeah,
right? So like now it's kind of like, she's doing all this kind of crazy stuff, and he thinks it's wrong, but in the end, it turns out that that was the reason they found Hydra, right?
yeah,
And it is actually a really good story arc for Steve, because he basically realizes that, like, well, this isn't all good. Like, this is, and actually he's kind at the beginning, that's kind of what he's with. I love the exchange between him and oh my gosh, Samuel L. Jackson, Nick Fury. Where they're talking about the what their surveillance that they're doing, and how that's wrong, and how that's like this isn't freedom, this is fear, right?
yep.
And I think it is actually a really good story arc to see him kind of go from Boy Scout to thinking what is the
Well,
best
and this
for.
this leads really nicely into where his story goes in Captain America: Civil War too.
Yeah, it
So the
does.
whole kind of journey and arc of Steve Rogers is one of personal is one of discovering personal agency and personal freedom.
Yeah,
Goes from being kind of an idealistic soldier who takes orders and who kind of bravely rushes into dangerous situations with no thought of himself, but he does sort of blindly just to take whatever he's told to do, he goes and does it. And he tries
yes,
to be a good soldier.
yeah,
And the journey of Steve Rogers by the time we get to Endgame is he finally decides that he's going to do something for himself. And that's where his story kind of ends, is he decides I completed the mission. I did what needed to be done, and now I'm gonna do something for me. I'm gonna do something
yeah,
for Steve, and I'm gonna go and live my life with
yeah.
the love
Well,
of my
and
life.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is such a great payoff for him,
Uh-huh.
because that's what he's always every movie, that's what he's wanted. He wishes he could have that dance, right?
Well,
Which
and
is like,
it's
which
so this in Captain America: Winter Soldier, it's so nice to see that sort of aching where he's like, "Well, I don't even
yeah,
know what I would do if I wasn't doing this because
yeah,
I'm not from here. I don't
yeah,
know anybody. The only woman I've ever loved is really old and is dying with dementia. And so like
yeah,
what would I even do?" And I love that Natasha's always trying to get him to go on dates with people and stuff, but
yeah,
he's like, I don't, like I don't speak the same language as these people.
yeah.
And yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think his backstory and his character, everything revolves around that, in pushing him as a character, right? Like he was in the 40s, and now he's coming to this world that is so different than his. All he wanted was to have the one dance with the girl that he liked, because he was so, no girl ever liked him,
Mhm.
right? And like, so all these problems really go into his character. I look at Brave New World, and I think Sam could have been so much more. His story could have been so much more interesting if it dealt with more with veterans, right?
Sure.
Or like PTSD,
Mhm.
something that like relates to his character. Because in this movie, like, he really, his one of the things that he's really good at is he's good at talking to veterans and
Mhm.
helping them through the problems that they have after war. And it really is like it's not a superpower, but it's his gift, right?
Well, and that's kind of what Sam and Steve bond over, is that
Exactly.
even though they're guys from 2 different generations,
Yeah.
they have this common,
Yeah.
understanding of what it's like to be in an active war zone.
Right,
And
which is really great for those two characters. And like, so Brave New World, it would be great if they could have integrated that into the movie,
mhm,
but it's not really about that. I mean, it's not about that, like how it is with Steve. Steve is adjusting to this new world and trying to take in everything. And then in Civil War, I mean, he goes against the government, which going against Shield is one thing because they were infiltrated by Hydra, but going against the government is another thing, where he is taking a stance as like, no, I don't think this is the right thing to do. I'm not just going to blindly follow you. Anyway, so his whole character, everything that he does it's really interesting for all the stories that they told. For Sam, it's not nearly as interesting because it's just kind of like, oh, this is like kind of like Winter Soldier, but it doesn't relate to Sam as a character, right? Like,
right,
it would have been so much
exactly.
better if they could have
There's
done something with that.
those are some of the kind of the key things that I highlighted about these couple movies that we watched is just
Yeah.
stakes and
Yeah.
the built-in character dynamics that already exist from the larger story being told and what
Yeah.
that does to help color the story, because you kind of can't view any of these movies in a vacuum. They're all connected to the larger story around them and informed by the larger story around them. If you showed any person just Captain America the Winter Soldier and they'd never seen any other MCU movie, they'd probably be like, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know
Yeah.
why it's significant that the Winter Soldier is Sebastian Stan. I don't know why, like they
Yeah.
wouldn't be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
they'd be like, oh, whoa, Sebastian Stan's under that mask. Like they don't know why that matters because they haven't seen
Right.
Captain America, the first Avenger. It's a TV show. Like you can't just watch season 3, episode 4 of a TV show you've never watched any other episodes of and be like, oh, this looks like a great show. You've got to watch the whole thing. But that's what makes these work, is it feels like we've sort of lost the connective tissue in these later seasons. And again, I think the problem is inside of having Thanos be the end goal, there are all these individual character arcs. And for Sam, being introduced in this movie, I really like the dynamic between Sam Wilson and Steve Rogers in this movie.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that we start with them. I mean, it's a really great scene with Sam
Yeah.
Wilson in the morning jogging around the reflecting pond at the Washington Monument, and Steve Rogers just keeps lapping him because
Yeah.
Steve,
On your left. On your
yeah,
left.
on your left, and Steve runs like 13 miles in like a half an hour or something. Like it's
Yeah.
like crazy,
Yeah.
Um, but also it shows like the similarities between them. Like they both wake up and they work out in the morning and they both get to, but
Yeah.
also they're both soldiers who are struggling to find a purpose
Yes.
to what it is that they do. They
Yeah.
both know that they have this really particular skill set, but they can't really find a reason for it anymore. Steve's still working on finding his reason, and I think Bucky is sort of his kind of emotional driver,
Yeah.
but Sam is inspired by Steve and
Mhm.
he believes in Steve. And so there's like this great little line where, like uh Nick Fury looks at Sam at one point late in the movie to kind of be like, hey, are you going to be on my side or what? And Sam just says, hey, don't look at me. I do what he does, just slower. And he just kind of is like, I'm with Captain America, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that the arc of Sam Wilson's character in from here to Endgame is Sam Wilson being first of all, he's given purpose again as a
Yeah.
soldier, and
Yeah.
he's really shown like not only are you just like a great soldier, but like you might be like you're good enough to hang with the big boys, like to be an
Right.
Avenger, to be on the A squad, to be on the top tier team. But kind of throughout this thing, he's still sort of viewed as Captain America's sidekick. He's just
Yeah.
like he's Captain America's right hand man. He goes with Captain America in Civil War. In Ant-Man, there's a joke where he's like, nobody tell Cap about the fact that
Yeah. Yeah.
Ant-Man kind of beat me up,
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah. It's
and
great.
all this stuff. But he's Steve's right hand man, and his arc is Steve allowing him at the end of Endgame to be like, you know what? You get to step up now, kid. Like you don't need to be like you never needed to be in my shadow. I
Yeah.
believe in you. Like you've hung with me this whole time, and there's no reason why you need to be just my sidekick. And I get that there could be a story to be told now that he's taking on the mantle, but also in a way, there is a completion of that character's journey. It's like the Sam Wilson as the side character journey, it's completed at the mantle being passed to him. And
Yes.
I feel like a better story is one that sort of exists in the imaginations of the audience of like, and then you
Yeah.
can just imagine what it would be like. But if they wanted to go on and keep telling the story because they're never going to stop because these movies keep making money.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, so you go do Winter Soldier and the Falcon and Winter Soldier. And that's a whole story about Sam not feeling worthy of the shield and having
Yeah.
the whole arc of that series is that he needs to feel like like he can trust that Steve gave him the shield for a reason.
Yeah.
But then you have basically in Captain America Brave New World, we basically do the same thing where he's just
Yeah.
like, I don't know, am I allowed to be Captain America? And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah.
As we've talked about before, that really Endgame, like Falcon and Winter Soldier should have been him struggling to take the mantle, but not like trying to give it up. Like he's trying to give it up, and it's in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and it's like that's like it actually probably would have been more interesting if he accepted the mantle, but the government didn't accept him as the Captain America, right? Like they gave it to he doesn't want it, so the government gives it to someone else, and then he has to get it back, right? But like if the government kind of went against him, and he is like proving himself and like actually has to step up and doesn't really refuse the call, just has to figure out how to get to that point. I
Mhm.
feel like that would have been better because then, as you said, in Brave New World, it's like this is the same story. Like
Yeah.
he should be in that role, and everyone should see him as Captain America, and like they should respect him as that. But I still feel like even we as an audience, if he is doubting it, like why are we going to think he's good, and why are the Avengers going to take him on as the new Captain America? So
And it's still just like you go back and you watch Captain America Winter Soldier, and it's still like, yeah, I know that Captain America Brave New World talks about this, where the whole kind of one of the themes is you're not Steve Rogers, kid, you know,
yeah,
and you're never going to be. And Sam Wilson knows that he knows that his strengths are different from Steve's strengths, and that he doesn't have Steve's super strength. But I still think it is kind of a fundamental problem, because one of the things about Captain America, as good of a person as Steve Rogers is, one of the things about him is he's superhuman. He's, you
yeah,
know, you can't
that
get away from it. Like it's all over Captain America the Winter Soldier. Like he is very, very strong and very
oh yeah.
powerful, you
And
know?
his the way the fight scenes in this that he's doing that are obviously superhuman moves
Mhm.
make it more fun
Yeah.
and make it more interesting. And I actually that from the very first part, from when he gets on the ship and they have to take over that ship and all that, he's fighting those guys, and that's like so cool. And I'm
And
like,
he's
this is
just
so fun to watch.
I remember seeing this movie in the theater and being like, I guess I didn't really think about it, but I guess Captain America just has no problem killing guys. Like he's
Yeah.
just he's just killing dudes.
That guy
He's
did not live.
yeah,
Yeah.
like his philosophy is like, if you decided to be part of the pirates, then you forfeited your life. Like I don't care if you got kids, I don't care. Like
Yep.
if you decided to team up with
Yeah.
people who are gonna
Yep.
hold, you know, with knowing that I'm out here, knowing that Captain America's out here, you decided to do this, then all right, then I'm gonna throw this
Yeah.
shield right at your neck and break your neck.
It's true. It's
Yeah.
true.
He's
But
just like,
he's so much more fun to watch.
yeah,
Murdering aside.
yeah, even I think it's even kind of funny in this movie, this little beat where he fights this like French guy that's leading
Yeah.
these pirates, and this guy's kind of, you know, he's obviously very strong, very like brave to fight Captain America, but as far as we know, this guy's not a super soldier
No.
like Captain America is. And he says to Steve, he goes, "I thought you were more than a shield." And Steve kind of puts his shield away and says, "Let's see." And I love that little beat, but it's still like, dude, you're gonna get worked. Like like
Yeah.
you're fighting a guy who has a serum running through his blood that makes him
Yeah.
like almost as strong as the Hulk. Like
Yeah.
he's going to destroy you. And then
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
does. He kicks
Yeah.
the crap out of that guy.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
you're not gonna win. It's
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
But I like it that Steve's like, "Sure, I'll put my shield away." Like, I'll, you know, and it's
Yeah.
similar to like the fight in the elevator, which is such a great fight where he's
Oh,
just like,
it's so cool.
yeah, they just put like 15 guys on the elevator with him, and he's like, "All right, boys." He's like, "You
Yeah.
really like, okay, like
Love it.
let's see if all of you can take me out." And it's like,
Well,
"No."
and the movie, you know, it's so good at raising the stakes and raising the tension and making these fight scenes fun
Yeah.
and interesting. Like the whole thing, like when he gets in on the elevator, like that's when he realizes like it's not just a fun scene, because it is a fun scene and
Mhm.
it's awesome in these tight quarters, and like they don't just like have all the guys come in at once and then they just attack him. Like they build it up, like a couple guys get in, you know,
Mhm.
and then a couple more, and he like they go behind him and he's like he gets pushed in the middle, and you could see that he
He
starts
notices
putting this
one
up.
guy has his hand on his gun,
Yeah.
and he sees that early on, and he's like,
Yep, and he sees the
and
guy sweating,
uh-huh.
and he's like, and so you know, like something's up, like, and so it's just like all this tension keeps raising. Like, why are there so many guys on here? Like, what's going on? And then like he gets it, and he's like, all right, if anybody wants to get off now. And they go after him, and he kicks the crap out of all of them, which is, and it's awesome too because they if he didn't have anything, he would have beat him so much quicker. But they put that metal thing on his arm, on his
Mhm.
wrist, right? And he's only got one arm, so he has to kick the crap out of him with one arm, which
Which
is
is
like
still
so cool.
and again, it's like Sam Wilson kinda can't be
No, he
in that
can't.
situation,
No.
and that's just what I mean, that's one of my problems with that movie is even with, like, the Wakandan tech of the,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, kind of the kinetic energy thing, I still am like, I don't think Sam Wilson can fight a Hulk. I just don't
Yeah.
think he can,
Yeah.
and I don't think that Sam Wilson can be in an elevator with 15 guys who are all trying to beat him up and get him and get out of there without his
Yeah.
wingsuit. Maybe with his wings, he can open his wings and just like chop everybody down. But I don't think just Sam
No.
Wilson just fighting
No.
can get out of there. And it's no shade to Anthony Mackie or to the character of Sam Wilson. It's just sort of a fundamental problem with like the difference between Steve
Yeah.
Rogers on a chemical level because Steve Rogers before the super serum is nowhere near the same soldier as Sam Wilson. You know
No.
what
Not even
Sam
close.
Wilson does is very impressive. Even
Yeah.
in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, he's great. Like
Yeah.
Sam Wilson really proves himself in that movie to be like a
Yeah.
valuable asset to the team.
He
But
does. And that's where he shines, is that side character, unfortunately.
yeah,
But
yeah, and again, it's like if we're talking about the bigger picture with what's wrong with the MCU and going back to this idea of like narrative decay,
yeah.
it's all just bonus story at this point because all of these characters had satisfying arcs that we were following. Part of what makes Captain America the Winter Soldier an interesting watch is tracking the character arc of Nick Fury, tracking the character arc of Steve
Yeah.
Rogers, tracking the
Yeah.
character arc of Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson,
Yeah.
track it, you know, and being introduced to new characters like Sam Wilson. Part of what it and when all of those arcs kind of reach this satisfying conclusion, and they did such a nice job of, for the most part, most of our main characters got really satisfying conclusions to their arcs, and even our side characters got little things where it's like further story is implied. It implies
Yeah.
that the story goes on, but we don't need to see it. The problem with bonus narrative is like I mentioned Joey and Rachel. It's just sort of like you get to a point where it's like, okay, we've had Ross and Rachel get together, then break up. Then Ross was going to marry Emily, but he said Rachel's name. Then they had this rekindling. They decided not to do it anymore. Now we're just sort of in this space where we're like, I guess we're focusing on Chandler and Monica now. Okay, Chandler and Monica are getting married. Okay, they're married. So what do we do now? Maybe Rachel and Joey, and it's like, and it's just like the like they don't once they've everything that they've been building toward is satisfied, they're just sort of like, how do we keep this going so we can keep making more money? And then you do something like a Joey spinoff, and you have the Joey spinoff series, and it's like no one really cares about watching. Maybe there's an interesting story to tell there, but no one really cares about watching Joey without the rest of the friends, and that's kind of what watching these latest MCU movies feels like is you're watching a spin-off show where they
Yeah.
just can't let it die. They just can't let the IP go.
Yeah.
And you keep tuning in to be like, maybe they'll do something interesting, but you're just sort of like, now the show's over and you guys just keep going. You just keep
Yeah.
trying to find things to say or do. And even the stuff that you're finding could be better written or more interesting. But the reason why I think that there's no cure for narrative decay is you kind of can't come back from you once your story's over, once you've finished telling a story in a
Yeah.
satisfying way, you kind of need to leave it and move on to a new story. You can't keep just like at and going, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this
Yeah.
happened. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, it really is. And also the one huge problem with a lot of this applies to TVs and movies, is like raising the stakes. Uh the I guess I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but like, or one-upping.
Yeah.
That's the better way. One-upping is like, okay, the sequel has to be bigger and better. And
Mhm.
like it's got to be more. And it's got to be like, we can't just have the same thing. We've got to have it bigger and we got to do one up. And it's like, okay, how are you going to one up wiping out half of the universe? Like,
Right.
how are you gonna do that?
Right.
Like you can't. And like that's fine that you can't, but it's also like it's kind of like, okay, well, what are we working up to? Like I don't. Thanos I knew, who's the other big bad, and like it's kind
Yeah,
of
it's gonna be Jonathan Majors, and then that kind of blew up in their
yeah,
faces and fell apart on them, and
yeah,
so it's like nobody knows what we're watching or what we're building toward. I can't tell you what character arcs we're kind of tracking and build like what relationships we got our eyes on. There were things like Iron Man and Pepper Potts, and there were things like, you know, Natasha has a little flirtation with Steve in this movie, but it's clear that they're not going to do that, that they're going to
right,
be friends.
right,
And then
yeah,
I think that the Natasha and Bruce Banner thing was interesting.
yeah,
And you know, there's things like Vision and Wanda, and there's things where you're tracking relationships. I can't tell you in the current version of the MCU what the relate like. Are we doing anything with? I mean, is Peter going to be trying to get MJ back now that she doesn't remember who he is at the end of No Way Home? Is
yeah,
like I can't tell you like what the character arcs are right now. It's just a bunch of movies that don't really feel like they have a direction, and that's because for the most part, they kind of did it. And now they're just in this bonus zone where it's almost like that implied story area where the story is implied to it's implied that Sam Wilson is going to go off and be some version of Captain America. But that's
mhm,
always going to be better in your imagination than if they try to show us, because we're not meant to see really what happens after the story ends. We're just meant to sort of, there can be implied things that go on. Kind of like the way that No Way Home ends with Spider-Man. I'm like, the fact that he's got an OG Spider-Man suit on that he made himself and he's running across, and it feels very like classic Spider-Man. It's sort of like this in many ways feels like the completion of this version of Peter Parker's story arc. There
yeah,
are open-ended things of like we don't know what's going to happen between him and his friends or him and MJ, but he's going off and he's going to be kind of the more classic version of Spider-Man. He's not wearing a Tony Stark suit. He's wearing a suit that he made himself, and it looks more like the
yeah,
classic. And this feel, but it's like let it let that be it. Let it end, you know?
yeah. Well, and it's also kind of hard. Like the the first MCU had Iron Man, which everyone was surprised that Iron Man was such a good character. And I mean, Robert Downey Jr. played him so well.
Right.
And then he is kind of like the master, the crown jewel, you
Mhm.
know, like everything kind of revolved around him. And he would come into movies for a little bit, and it kind of like you had a central figure that like everybody could kind of rally around. And I mean, Steve Rogers was also kind of that to a point. It was him and Iron Man were like the two. Now it's like, okay, who's the one? And I feel like it should be Peter, should be Spider-Man, or the X-Men. But the X-Men, honestly, you could probably do
They're
something
not even there
completely
yet, so
original. Yeah.
we don't even know what we're gonna do with them, you
It's
know?
almost like maybe you guys should just not do any Avengers and just do an X-Men universe for a while. I don't know if that would be good or not, but that would be something different that would give us a pause, and then maybe we'd be excited for the other ones when they come back. But if Peter could be the central character, like the new Tony Stark, if we could kind of all rally around Peter, that would be great. The problem with that is that Marvel still doesn't own Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So they can't even do that. So like Spider-Man, it's great when he comes in, but he's owned by Sony, and
Yeah.
he can't like they can't really do as much with him. So they're really kind of in a catch-22 again, where
Well,
it's
and
like,
it just doesn't, it's like that's the thing that was working in that original continuity is there were
yeah,
character arcs that you could track between films that felt like
yeah,
they connected in a satisfying way with each other, that felt like they built on each other in a satisfying way. Even Thunderbolts, it's like I can't even, it feels like it's going to be just like its own thing. I don't see how Thunderbolts is going to build on whatever character arc they were already
right,
establishing for,
right,
you know, it's and also the marketing is getting increasingly desperate for these films. Like the marketing for Captain America Brave New World, it felt like they did so many different versions of like how they tried to package the trailer to get people to see it. And again, it's like I think one thing that was working during the original continuity is great villains, and we haven't really had
right,
that in this latest. Cassandra Nova was like okay in Deadpool, and but like the marketing for Winter Soldier was no one knew who the Winter Soldier was. And it was actually a genuine surprise when that mask came off for the first time. And the movie does such a good job of building the kind of the allure and the suspense around who the Winter Soldier is. And then also, like, you know, not for nothing, Robert Redford's in this movie
Oh yeah,
doing
awesome.
great, doing great work as like a really interesting, really nuanced villain. And you know, who's not just like mustache twirling, but actually has a plan that's interesting, that's like
Yeah.
that you know, and there's sort of this built on lore with around like the corruption that's baked into the US government that Iron Man has bumped up against in Iron Man 2 with some of those kind of like uh
Yeah.
congressmen and senators. And like it just felt like there was like a satisfying world being built. The latest trailers for Thunderbolts have me laughing so hard because it's literally Marvel saying without saying, like, this is an A24 movie. I don't know if you've seen this
Yeah.
trailer that goes like, it's like from
Yeah.
the
Yep.
editor of
Yeah.
Everything Everywhere All at Once and
Production designer of
the
this.
the production designer of Minari and
Yeah.
like the composer of, and it's
Yeah.
all these A24
I
movies. And it's like
I've never seen anything like that.
I've never seen
Like,
anything.
wow.
It even says
Wow.
the cast of Midsommar and
Yeah.
you know, like these different
Yeah.
A24 movies that all of these actors have been in. And it's literally just listing a bunch of different A24 movies and
That's so
roles that
true.
movies never
Yeah.
say like from the editor
No.
of,
No, no,
or
no, no.
from
I've
the
never.
cast of, or from the the person who did the
Yeah.
soundtrack for, you know, like
Yeah, the cinematographer from Green Knight and
yep.
yeah, like you never like you never bill anyone like that. You can do producer, you can do producers or like,
Um,
you know, producers of, you could do director,
writer and
but
director.
that's like,
Yeah.
yeah, writer sometimes,
Yeah,
like
sometimes.
barely. But like cinematographer, production designer, editor, no, I've never seen that before in my life,
This
which I
trailer is literally just them going, it's an A24 movie.
it's that's what they're going for.
If you guys like A24, this is an A24 Marvel movie, is what they're saying in that
Yeah.
trailer, very, very blatantly. But it also feels really desperate. It feels like they're like,
It's
please come watch it. It's gonna be cool.
yeah,
This one's
yeah.
gonna be cool. Like this one's cool. This like
I do actually I'm not gonna lie. I actually really like that trailer
I
because it
do
was so
too.
different,
It
but
pandered,
it is
yeah,
like it is pandering like, look at all these crazy things. This is
yeah.
gonna be crazy too.
And it
And then
doesn't
it's
tell
kind
you.
of like, okay, yeah,
And I like
sure.
that it doesn't tell me anything about the movie,
Yeah,
and it does, and honestly, I'm like, my prediction for Thunderbolts is that it's going to be one of my more
yeah,
enjoyable experiences, but what I'm scared of is that I'm gonna go see it, and it's gonna just be like, "Nope, this is just another, like, post-Endgame Marvel movie that
yeah,
doesn't really have an
yeah,
anchor and doesn't really know what it wants to and it doesn't really have, like, its footing in this in a continuity, because the continuity is kind of all over the place right
yeah,
now.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it maybe it'll work as like a one-off that's interesting visually or something, and it's definitely got a good cast, but I'm worried that I'm gonna go see it and be like, you guys kind of tricked us with the marketing, like
Yeah.
this
I
is
hope
just
not.
another. Hopefully not, but I also just don't know, like, what is the larger story right now? Because when I watch Ant-Man and when I watch Winter Soldier, I know what the larger story being told is and how these
Yeah,
movies help to inform that. I don't really know what's going on in the larger story of the MCU right now, or what they're
yeah,
trying to build towards. And so even
yeah,
when there's moments in movies that I think are interesting visually, or there's beats that I think are interesting for that character, I'm like, I don't really get, you know, like, I think the villains in Brave New World were weak and not particularly interesting.
yeah,
It's very interesting to have Bucky Barnes be this shadowy ghost assassin who's been going around on these missions throughout the 20th century. He's been
yeah,
frozen and
yeah,
unfrozen, and he's been sent out on these missions, and he's kind of like the opposite of Steve Rogers, but they're both. I think that's really compelling storytelling, and
mhm.
you know, I just don't see anything like that in these later iterations where
Well, yeah, and it's also a problem again is there's things have become too big. Like there never was an Avengers until they got to the Avengers.
right,
It's like now it's like if you have a huge event, everybody's wondering, well, why don't you get the Avengers?
yeah,
And so that's kind of one of the problems too. So the stakes have to be more personal.
yeah,
They have to be more personal, which I think they kind of get away from. Like, no, make it a personal story. Like that's why Black Panther. I know that that was in the previous one, but that's why Black Panther is so good is because the stakes are personal. They're
mhm,
about his own country and his own. history, right, and genealogy of the decisions that his father and his fathers before him have made. Anyway, so it's a really good story because it's very personal. There's not, Brave New World's not very personal to Sam.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah. What were you
and
gonna say? Sorry.
and I was gonna talk now Ant-Man.
Yep. I was gonna say shifting gears to Ant-Man. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Let's
an Ant-Man. The
yeah.
thing that makes Ant-Man so interesting is it's a fun movie.
Yeah.
First of all, like, and so now it's like it was great to watch the Captain America movie, and now I'm glad that we watched Ant-Man because it is pretty self-contained.
Yeah.
But you know that it is leading to something bigger, and it knows what it is. It's a heist movie, so it's a fun heist movie. You have Paul Rudd, who's great. He's a funny character. It's a pretty funny script. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but then it has this power that's really interesting, like
Yeah.
shrinking and like hitting people and getting big and going small and getting small. Like running around and running on the gun. Like, it's a fun thing to watch.
Peyton Reed does a nice job with this
He
movie,
does.
but it definitely has Edgar Wright all over it.
I
Like
know.
it has the DNA of Edgar Wright.
It does.
You know?
And I really did like this movie. And I do think Peyton Reed, he had to come in and, like, I don't want to say fix the project because it wasn't being fixed, but he had to pick it up and carry it across the finish line. And he did a great job because it is a fun movie. Adam McKay came in and Paul Rudd, they helped like with the script to kind of make the transition. You can definitely see like the whole Sam Wilson, the whole Falcon part. You could totally tell that was shoehorned in, but it actually worked and it was fun. But I really would have loved to see what Edgar Wright would have done with this movie because I know that it would have been more stylized. The music would have been better. It probably would have just had more popular music in it, and it would just be more fun and more Edgar Wright, which I love Edgar Wright. So,
but I'll say this about Ant-Man. So Ant-Man's not one of my favorite MCU movies. Like I think I like Ant-Man and the Wasp a little bit more. Ant-Man, for me on rewatches, it can get a little draggy in the middle.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
I think that it gets a little like, okay, let's go. But I'll say this about that first era of the MCU, those first three phases or whatever they were, the Infinity Saga. One way that they kept the TV show from getting creatively stagnant or from every episode of the show feeling too similar is they let directors come in and do interesting things with their episode. So Winter Soldier is a great example of this. The Russos came in, it's their first episode that they got to direct, and they came in and they made this like spy thriller, and they definitely did something that felt stylistically like its own thing. And they let Guardians of the Galaxy be its own thing and have its own energy and its own kind of rhythm. And then they let Taika Waititi come in and do Thor Ragnarok, and even inside of the Thor continuity, you have Thor, then Thor the Dark World, and Thor is directed by Kenneth Branagh, has this very Shakespearean kind of, which is right, to introduce us to these characters. I think Thor the Dark World is not as bad as people say it is. I dog on that movie a lot. I think it's fine. But then Thor Ragnarok comes in and it like reinvents it, but it still feels connected to the Thor storyline. And that's what's so impressive about these early MCU films is the way that they would let, Shane Black come in and do a Shane Black Iron Man movie. And they would let, and you would feel the presence of the director, and they would let people kind of put their creative stamp on things. And Ant-Man's a great example of that. Like Peyton Reed getting to come in and have some fun with this character, because I remember when they announced this movie, people were like, Ant-Man. But then the movie sort of has fun with that. The movie has fun with the fact that you're like, why would you do Ant-Man? It's like, oh, don't worry, we're putting Paul Rudd in here, and he's gonna just it's gonna be silly, and the movie's not gonna take itself too seriously, but it does still live in the larger world nicely. Because when Paul Rudd's character gets introduced to people like Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, he's always like, hi guys. So, and they're always like, who are you? Like, and they kind of, and they have fun with the fact that Ant-Man's sort of an outsider. And I think that's why maybe my favorite MCU movie of the last several years was Deadpool and Wolverine, because it's the only one that feels like it has its own individual style. But I still have a problem where I go like, I don't know how this connects to the larger thing. It just definitely feels like it feels more like it's a part of the Deadpool trilogy than it does like it's a part of the MCU larger story.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's supposed to connect with other than having it do with the TVA and stuff. I don't know how it's supposed to connect with the larger MCU story, but it definitely feels like it's got its own thing going on. And that was what was cool about some of these movies. Is like Ant-Man has its own energy and vibe,
Yeah.
and I like that.
Yeah. It is good. It's a lot of it's a lot of fun. It, like I said before, like it knows what it is, and it has an interesting I the story is good. It does set up for other movies. And it kind of like, and the a lot of people like rag on this villain, but I actually think he's better than a lot of the other ones.
Yeah.
He's better than, like, I actually kind of like him. They gave him a story, like he's really wanting approval, and like I think that he's not the most interesting, he's not the worst,
Yeah, I
but
don't know why he's so homicidal. Like, I don't get that.
yeah, I don't get that
Yeah.
either.
Mhm.
But like he's at least he seems at least dangerous, and he's kind of a
Yeah.
fun one to watch. Way better than
It almost seems like they needed to do something where, like, in his experimentation to replicate the Pym particle, he toyed with some chemical that, like, messed with his
yeah, that would be something.
messed
Yeah.
with his brain or something and made
Yeah.
him more, and they sort of allude to that, like his obsession with proving himself to Hank Pym has warped him and made him
Yeah.
lose sight of who he is. And they allude to that, but I think they could have made it more interesting if it was like something happened and he was so obsessed that he drank some potion or something that
Right.
made yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely could have done something, but he was at least interesting,
Yeah.
and it was fun. And then the other thing that I noticed for Ant-Man that they did, kind of like we talked about with Brave New World, like it would have been great to have another Avenger come in. Like if Rhodey could have come in, War Machine could have come in, that would have made it fun. And even though I said that the scene was shoehorned in with Falcon, I still liked the scene because
Yeah.
it was funny. Like
Yeah.
I forgave it because it was a fun scene, and it actually does pay off in the post-credit scene. The
Yeah.
post-credit scene is from Civil War, and he's like, "Hey, I know this guy that can help us," and it turns out to be Ant-Man, which I'm like, "Oh, it makes sense." Like,
it works nicely to fold that into Civil War. That
yes,
it's like Sam Wilson's like, "Hey, I met
yeah,
this guy who's got this suit, and if we're looking for team members to go,
yeah. Like,
for
I think
Team
he can
Cap."
help us.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
That's nice. You need to have that. You need to establish
yeah,
that connection, and I think it is a fun scene.
yeah.
I
Well,
think, and it's kind of a proving ground scene for Scott before
yes.
he goes on his big final mission. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it is it kind of leads to this is where the story is going. Like we've been talking about, like, oh, they gave this little hint, like, oh, I'm gonna see that in the next movie. I'm gonna see that in the next episode. So it kind of made it like more fun to look out for. Like we kind of
yeah,
have that with adamantium, but that really, like, that's so vague. Like I know that's pointing to
right,
the X-Men and to Wolverine, but like how?
right.
This one is like, oh, he meets an Avenger, and then in the post credit, like, oh, Ant-Man's gonna come back in this movie, and it's like, oh yeah, cool.
And then he does,
And then he does, yeah.
and Ant-Man's awesome in Captain America: Civil War.
He is.
It's like one of the coolest parts of the movie.
Yeah.
That whole scene at Ant-Man getting giant and stuff like that, and revealing that power that's not even in this first movie
Yep.
is really
Yep.
fun. Like saving that for Civil War, and I think Michael Pena and the boys are really
Oh,
fun
so
in
funny.
this movie. Michael Pena is so funny in this movie, and I really don't think that he like overdoes it or anything. I think it's like
No,
he
I think
feel
it's great.
it's great. And like the whole Michael Pena telling stories and them doing like a kind of like a drunk history, like lip syncing thing where everyone
Oh,
is
I
so
loved it.
funny.
So
And
funny.
again, it gives the movie its own kind of sense of identity. And
Yeah.
like I love the guy that plays Scott's boss at Baskin Robbins at the beginning, he's like, "Hey man, I was reading up on you. That's awesome." And he's like,
Yeah.
"That's so cool." And then he goes, "Well, obviously I have to fire you."
Yeah.
He's like, "Well, listen, if you
He's
want
like,
to grab one of those."
you want to grab one of those mango supremes or whatever? Like,
Yeah.
I'll just look the other way. And he's
Yeah.
like, and he is actually drinking it, which is pretty funny.
Yeah,
But
yeah, which
yeah,
is awesome.
it's a
Yeah.
funny little, it's a funny little scene. But yeah, it's a I that's why I didn't love Ant-Man and Quantumania. Like
Yeah.
it did not feel like it fit with the other two. The other two were fun. They were funny. Like
And
they did weird things. And the Quantumania was just like a straight superhero movie that was dumb.
I get the natural progression that it's like, hey, you introduce
Yeah.
this concept of the quantum realm. And that's a really fascinating concept. And I forgot that we actually go there in this first Ant-Man movie. The Ant-Man
Yeah.
actually, in the climax of the film,
Right.
shrinks himself all the way down and goes subatomic and actually is falling into the quantum realm when we were introduced to that space, and that he, you know, uses this PIM tool on his regulator to,
Yeah.
to
Blow himself up.
blow himself back out of there. And I think that's cool. And I think it's a natural progression to be like in Ant-Man and the Wasp, we explore the fact that they've been able to, they're trying to reach the quantum realm because they think that Hope's
Right.
mother, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, might be alive down there. And it makes sense that for a trilogy of Ant-Man films, we should do a whole movie where they just go
Yeah.
quantum. And
Yeah.
it should have. I liked the concept of Ant-Man Quantumania.
Right.
Like
Right.
that seemed like a great, it's kind of like I like the concept of Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. I
Yes.
like the idea, the
Yeah.
abstract concept of Doctor
Yeah.
Strange going through the multiverse and having all this. But the problem with Multiverse of Madness is he goes to like one other universe and just doesn't. There's a scene where he's traveling through multiverses and it's like a 30-second long little montage of him going through different multiverses, and then the majority of the movie just takes place in one alternate universe.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
so this isn't really Multiverse of Madness, this is just Doctor Strange in like universe over here
Yeah.
with these. And I thought that movie could have been so much more wacky and crazy and wild and trippy. And I kind of felt the same way about Quantumania, where it's like, hey, if we're gonna go down here, Quantumania was so weird too, just in that it just seemed like, I made a video making fun of it at the time, where it just
Oh, you
seemed like
did.
they just told their design team, like, any kind of guy you can think of, just put that in the movie. And they were like,
Yeah.
broccoli guy in the movie. Like, I don't know, like a guy that's a bunch of bubbles. And they're like, yeah, bubble guy for sure. Guy that, it's like, what about a guy who, like, you drink him and his goo makes you be able to understand people? And it's like, yeah, sure, 100%. It's like, it's just like any kind, it's like buildings that walk around, and it's like, oh yeah, sure, like it's just,
it was crazy. Yeah.
And I think that I just think the movie could have been more fun. I think
Well,
that the
yeah,
movie
and
could have been,
I think that's what we're both saying. Like, I don't have a problem with them going into the quantum realm. The
yeah,
problem is it didn't feel like the other two. The other two were fun. They had they had a style. It was usually a heist comedy or like something something like that, and that didn't feel like it fit in that trilogy. And I think we kind of both agree on that. It could have been more fun.
yeah. Yeah, and it seems like a natural progression for the story, but yeah,
Yeah.
when you get there, it's just sort of like, and as so many things are, I don't know if it's just fatigue from the writing team of being like, we've just been writing for these characters for so long and trying to find new interesting things for them to do and new ways to surprise the audience stylistically, or if it's that the studio, that Disney in collaboration with Marvel, are clamping down on their directors and the amount of freedom that they're trying to give directors on what they can and can't do.
Could be.
I don't know. I mostly, I just think that it is just a TV show that should have been canceled and that never will be canceled. And it's so weird because I look into the future with Marvel and I go, they're never going to stop this. Like, there's never going to be a time where they're just going to go, that's enough, and we can now start over. We can cancel this show, end this show, say the end, and then start a new one and have a new continuity with a new Iron Man and a new, like, I don't know why that, I feel like one thing that DC does well is they know when to quit and they know when to like start over. Cause it's like, they just,
they've done it about 5 times.
Totally. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it's like, how many different times have they reinvented Batman in the last 20 years? And then,
and they're not afraid to have something that is in its own universe.
Yeah.
So the Batman with Robert Pattinson is not connected to the new DCU.
Right.
Like, and Joker is not even connected to the Robert Pattinson Batman.
Right.
Like, and I feel like that's why I was saying, like, maybe they should just do an X-Men universe for a while and play that up and have it lead up to Apocalypse. you know, and have like a whole 10-year period where they lead up to Apocalypse. And then once that's done, maybe you reboot the series and start it over, or pick up the characters or something. Like, I don't know. Like it seems like we need to take a break from the MCU for a while and do the X-Men universe.
Yeah, because
Something. I don't know if that would work or
the
not. But
same problem is happening with Star Wars too, where it's just too
yeah.
much of the story, and then you get fatigued because you're kind of like, I don't even know kind of where we're at or how I'm excited for Andor season 2 because I think that that's one of the best shows that has ever been made inside of the Star Wars continuity. But so I still think that these properties are capable of the occasional surprise. I'm hoping
Yeah.
Thunderbolts will be that. I would not be surprised if it winds up just being kind of more of the same, but I'm
Yeah.
hoping to be surprised by it. But yeah, it was nice to go back to these films and be
Yeah.
like, it made me want to watch the other ones too. It made me want to watch
Oh
Captain
yeah.
America
Yeah.
Civil
Yeah. Yeah.
War. Maybe want to
Yeah.
watch, Thor Ragnarok. Maybe want to watch
Totally.
all 3 of the Iron Man movies, to be honest. Maybe want to
Yeah.
watch Avengers Age of Ultron. I think that's an underrated movie. I like it. I like that movie. I just feel like that was such an impressive
Yeah.
feat. Those like 20 or 22 movies that all connected.
Oh,
And it
crazy.
just seems like everything's kind of been in this weird,
Yeah.
just like it just feels like when Scrubs switched networks from NBC to ABC, and all of a sudden you're watching Scrubs on ABC and you're like, huh, it's Scrubs, but like JD's like a teacher at like a medical school, and he's teaching, and it's like Scrubs, the new class, and it's like the new class, and it's just sort of like it's not the same show, I don't really,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just like I don't really just
Yeah.
let it go,
Yeah.
Um,
I agree. I think we should have to talk about Andor at another time, though.
yeah,
I I don't
you,
really share the same opinion that you do.
oh boy, it's one of my favorite TV shows from like the last like 20 years. I love Andor.
I got some
Um,
gripes about it. I
all
will.
right, I would love to hear that. Let's do scores for these
Okay, let's do
films.
it.
We watched 2 movies. We watched Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and we watched Ant-Man. Our scoring system, if this is your first time watching our show, we give a technical rating for just the nuts and bolts, the craft of it, the writing, the acting, the special effects, the staging. We give a score for the ending. How well did the movie stick the landing? We give a score for rewatchability, for cultural significance, and a subjective score. And it's a out of 10, 10 being the best. So Kramer, what'd you give Captain America: The Winter Soldier on a technical
I gave
number?
it an 8. I think it's done really, really well. Okay, we didn't talk about this, but
Mhm,
the structure for Captain America Winter Soldier was not very traditional.
mhm,
It does hit the beats, but like they had the midpoint and then it like immediately went into the third act, like
mhm,
right after that. And I love structure. I love to see it. I think you have it's really good to have a good structure, but for this movie, like if it's working, just go with it.
mhm.
Like this doesn't matter that the structure is a little bit weird and things aren't hitting where they're supposed to, because the movie is working. Like the movie is working really well, and it's not traditionally kind of how you see it. So I actually really like it. So I gave it an 8. I thought it was really good. I
Yeah,
love it.
whereas Ant-Man has some pacing issues, this movie is
Yes.
incredibly well paced. Captain
Yes.
America: The Winter Soldier it just keeps moving and moving and moving,
Yeah.
and it just keeps taking you from like one interesting thing to the next, and there's lots of like surprises and unexpected
Yeah.
things in this movie that I
Yeah.
remember the first time seeing it being genuinely kind of surprised by several story beats and
Yeah.
constantly entertained,
Yeah.
and different kinds of action set pieces, like just setting one in an elevator that's like so cool. And yeah, I gave this movie an 8 as well.
Nice.
Technical. So how about the ending for Captain America: The Winter Soldier?
Yeah, I gave the ending an 8 as well. I mean, it's a big spectacle.
Mhm.
I mean, it's awesome, and it looks really good. A lot of stuff blowing up, a lot of stuff,
It still looks great. I
It
mean,
does. It
I
does.
was really kind of impressed with that. This whole sequence where the helicarriers kind of come up out of the
Yeah.
water, and I was
Yeah.
like, man, this stuff looks great in this movie. Like Marvel was putting out some heat with these special
Yeah.
effects. And yeah, it is a great climax. It's an emotional climax with him and his friend
Yeah.
Bucky, where Captain America is more or less willing to kind of die with his friend. He looks at his friend and just kind of goes like, "Hey man, if we're gonna go down, and I don't care if you're gonna kill me, I'm with you
Yeah.
to the end of the line, pal. And
Oh yeah. It's
and I
awesome.
like I like Bucky jumping into the water after him and pulling him out, not really knowing who he is, but having a sense that like
Yeah.
there's something about this guy. I think that's a really strong ending. I really yeah, I gave it an 8 as well. How about the rewatchability for this movie?
Rewatchability, I gave a 9
Yeah.
because it's just like really rewatchable.
Mhm.
It's fun. It's also a movie that like if you've seen it before, you could just pick up at any part,
Mhm.
know where you are, and just enjoy watching the rest of it. So
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
great.
Yeah. It's a very entertaining film, and it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how many times I see it, it's still very entertaining, and there's just so many different sections that are interesting, and knowing the characters in the larger story, it's interesting to watch what's going on with them at this point in the story.
Yeah.
I gave it
Yeah.
an 8, for rewatchability,
Yeah.
but I really
Yeah.
like it. How about cultural significance?
Cultural impact, significance. I did an 8 as well because I think that this like this really kind of showed that the MCU could keep going. And
Yeah.
like, it was after Avengers, pretty soon after Avengers, and it was like, okay, like it gave the MCU a lot more momentum. Like I just remember everybody loving it. Almost like after the Avengers, they were like, "Oh, what do you do now?" Excuse me. And this movie was kind of like, "Here you go. Like this is where we can go with this." And it really it really kind of hit on all cylinders and showed us that this is where it can go.
I agree. I think everyone was really impressed with what they had seen up to the Avengers
Yeah.
and the way that that was pulled off. But everything had kind of been this like tongue in cheek comic booky sort of aesthetic. This
Yeah.
felt like the first movie that kind of dropped everything into a more grounded place. So I give this an
Yeah.
8 because I think it sort of legitimized the MCU as like there are serious stories with real emotional impact that can be told here, that are with
Yeah.
characters that feel grounded and character arcs. Because going from Captain America: The First Avenger, which is such a like kind of plucky movie that's
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
this, there's such a stark contrast in tone,
Yeah.
and I feel like this movie did a lot for the MCU in kind of making it feel like this, yeah, had a life
Well,
beyond the Avengers. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, especially with the Russo brothers.
Mhm.
I mean, they did this one, then they did Civil War, then they did Infinity War and Endgame. And
I
it's
think
like
the fact that Kevin Feige decided to give them kind of the reins to tell
yeah.
the biggest remaining stories says a lot about this movie.
Well, yeah, and I was reading and it came down to them, F. Gary Gray and Nolfi, whatever, I forgot his first name. Nolfi. And I guess F. Gary Gray dropped out to do another movie, and they won the job because of Community,
Mhm.
the show Community.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like they did an episode that was like action. I can't remember what the episode's called. It's like the paintball one or whatever. But they got it, and it's like, good job, Kevin Feige, for like giving them the reins because it's they
Community
weren't very experienced, but they
uh,
really they really came onto they rose to the occasion.
shout yeah, Community is another one of my favorite TV shows of all
Oh, I
time,
love
and
it. Yeah,
yeah,
that show's
love
great.
that. Love that show.
Yeah.
We could do a whole series on just Community.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that show's brilliant.
Oh, it is good.
But yeah, and the fact that yeah, that he handed them the reins really says like, okay, this movie, I think he really believed in them after this, and I think
Yeah,
the audience, I think the rest of the movies that they directed in the MCU are all really good. They haven't really made a movie since the MCU that's been very successful, but the 4 movies that they did in the MCU are all very good.
they're amazing.
Um,
Yep.
so and subjective score for Captain America: Winter Soldier.
I gave it an 8. It's a great time, and it's smarter than you think it would be. It's a really good movie.
Me too. I was 8s all the way down on this one. It sounds like you were 8s except for 1 9.
Yeah, the
And
rewatchability, yeah.
yeah, I was 8s all the way down. Ant-Man. What is your technical rating for Ant-Man?
7. It's solid. It's a
Yeah.
really solid movie. It's not the best, but it's not the worst. It's some fun stuff. So
That's exactly where I'm at. 7. I think it, has some pacing issues, and it's
yeah,
also just like not the most fun, but it's got a lot of personality and
yeah,
it totally works. And like the characters as an introduction to them are all interesting, and I want to see more from them and more from the character by the end of the movie, which is all very good. How about the ending?
I gave the excuse me, I gave the ending a 7.5
Hmm.
because I actually think it pays off really well. It's like it's a really good payoff
Yeah.
with his daughter, And
Mhm.
then like with his, the new husband, Bobby
Yeah,
Carnival, who he's actually really good in this movie.
yeah,
Like surprisingly, that story really pays off emotionally.
yeah,
And it kind of like it sets up for the next one. So I didn't want to give it an 8 because it wasn't like it was amazing, but it
yeah.
was very emotionally satisfying. So 7.5.
Yeah, I gave it a 7. It's kinda same thing. I feel like it works. I feel like, I like this climactic fight in
Yeah.
Cassie's bedroom,
Yeah, oh, I love
and
it.
I
Yeah.
like that Peyton Reed has fun with the visual, that it's them throwing trains at
Yeah.
each other,
Thomas
then
the
it
train.
but then it shows the wide shot of the train just kinda
Yeah,
falling
like
over.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's fun, and, I think that it's a fun kind of setting for a climactic scene, but I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's like one of the greatest endings in the MCU. So I gave it a 7.
Yeah.
How about rewatchability?
I did 7.
Yeah,
Again, just a solid movie to rewatch. I think I do kind of agree with you. Definitely on rewatch. Sometimes you're like, I don't know if that's holding up or whatever, but still a fun movie to watch. Paul Rudd is great. So
yeah. I went down to a 6 just because I just found myself kind of
yeah,
drifting. I was just sort of like,
I could see that.
I definitely wasn't having as much fun as I was having watching Winter Soldier. While I was watching
Yeah,
Winter Soldier, I just kept thinking like, man, this movie's great. This movie's
yeah,
really good.
yep,
And watching Ant-Man, I was like, this movie's fun and has a lot of fun things. I don't
yeah,
think it's great. I think it's
yeah.
fun.
I
Yeah.
think you're probably you're right. Yeah,
Cultural significance, cultural impact.
yeah. I did a 6 because it was it was fun. I mean, it was great because it was like, oh, you can make minor characters more interesting. Like
Yeah.
you can make them more interesting. So that when you put the right people on them. But I don't think it really changed. I mean, him as a character though, I mean, he ultimately is the reason why the Avengers were able
Yeah.
to to save
Yeah.
everybody in Endgame.
Ant-Man,
Uh
I personally like Ant-Man a lot
oh, I do too.
more as a side character in the bigger stories. I like
Yes.
him more in, like,
Yeah.
Civil War. Like, I love Scott Lang's story in Endgame, and,
Yeah.
like, I think it's very emotional. Like, him when Paul Rudd sees his daughter for the first time,
Oh,
and she's
so good.
she's all grown up, and he missed out on her growing up, and she thought he was dead for I
Yeah,
mean, like,
5 years.
yeah, it's that hits hard,
It does.
and I feel like Scott Lang works better as a kind of side character in big it's kinda like Black Widow, like, in her own movie, it was fine, but the Scarlett Johansson character, I think, works better as, like, a
Yeah.
side character in someone else's main story,
Yeah.
and
They either
yeah,
push the characters or they make them do things that are more interesting for other people's movies. I think
yeah,
you're totally right on
yeah.
that. Yeah.
So but I gave it a 6,
Yeah.
cultural significance, and subjective score for Ant-Man.
7. It's good.
That's
I like it. It's a
That's
fun
right where
movie.
I'm at, 7. Yep,
Yep.
solid movie, solid MCU movie, not my favorite, but not definitely
Yeah.
not bad, and, yeah, so that's it. So, where do you think the MCU's at? Are you still enjoying these movies? Let us know in the comments. Do you think our analysis is right on why it maybe has, fallen off or fallen into something like narrative decay? Let us know. Comment, like, share, subscribe, all the things. Tell your friends about the Oner podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.